Welcome to HJT Design Radio Straight Talk, a show dedicated to exploring all aspects of creating a great dental office, where the only dumb question is the question that's not asked. Here's Jim and Han.
Good evening, Jim Jarvis here, and along with me, my co-host Han. Han, are you there?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Jim. We're going to have a fantastic, exciting night, guys.
Absolutely. Welcome to Straight Talk, HJT Design Radio, episode number 14, which we've titled Dental Lease Negotiator. Now, we've got an exceptional guest who is a powerhouse in that field and will be an individual that we're going to hopefully gain a lot of knowledge from and pick his brains, and he'll be joining us here in the next few minutes or so in regards to, just what is a lease negotiator. So many times, you may be, let's say you're starting to practice, either your startup or you're moving to a new location or you're doing something, but you've decided that you don't want to be a property owner. You basically want to say, I'm going to lease something. I'm going to lease a space. It may be caused by there really isn't any property around in your particular geographic location, and you want to stay within that area because it's underserved, and you feel that it's a great place for a practice, so you're forced to lease something as opposed to buy and build or buy and renovate. And so you say, we've got a lease. Then it's a matter of, how do you best go about doing that? How do you, we're always been, Han and I, we've talked about in all these episodes about the team approach and the advocate. Make sure you get the best person or persons on your team. Go back and listen to our previous episodes. You'll get to learn all about that stuff. But, let the experts help you so that you can succeed as opposed to trying to muddle through this stuff by yourself. It might be your first time. It might be your first time in dealing with a landlord or trying to negotiate a lease with working with a realtor or working with letting your realtor work with their realtor. It just becomes a multitude of areas that maybe end up causing a quagmire that you let an expert like our guest George will be able to work through and cut through all the crap and really get the best deal. Get the best deal for you. Make it so that it is advantageous for you to move into that lease and look out for your best interest. I guess one of the things that's rather interesting when you look, especially when you look at a purchase and or a buy of something, and there's a real estate agent that, obviously there's an agent that you have, and then there's an agent that the seller has. Well, the seller's agent looks out for the seller's interest. Your agent should look out for your interest. And so in a leasing scenario like we're going to be talking about, you want to have someone that's looking out for your interest, that understands the uniquenesses of dentistry and what should be asked and what should be covered. Han, what are your thoughts about our guest and anything you want to say in the way of an introduction before we bring him in?
Well, I mean, unless you want me to kind of, steal George's thunder, I wouldn't want to do that. But
no, don't steal George's thunder. But
yeah, I mean, I can't say, from the conversation that I have with George on projects, on technical issues and stuff like that, I think George would be a great value to any team. Again, I don't always advocate anyone to look at just simply how much things cost, because you have to look at the long term of your situation and your investment. So looking for the best value, and value doesn't necessarily equate to dollars. Okay, I'll let George explain some of what that is about. Yeah, I think the term lease negotiator is foreign to a lot of people. That's including people that have been in the field, have been in practices, had leased their space a couple of times. Because in the public place, usually you hear of broker, you hear of realtor. Those people, they're all professionals, but professionals and their title sometimes doesn't fit the specific expertise that they can bring to the table. Okay, negotiation isn't something that anybody can simply learn. It's a gut feeling. It's part of the magic that a person have formulated and refined over a number of years. For George, he's been around in the industry for over 40 years. So George can bring a lot to the negotiation. So I think it would be a treat. George and George has a lot of knowledge that he can share. That I think worthwhile to tune in and take notes. Okay. Hopefully, I answer your question, Jim.
Oh, absolutely. And we've had many discussions about the projects and the best, whatever's best for you as the dentist who's looking to provide the very best service for his client, but at the same time trying to create a scenario in that it's the best for you, for your fit. Not everybody wants to be a landowner. Not everybody wants to be a landlord. So some dentists are cut out to wanting to do that. They can see the financial advantage of buying, owning, and potentially even leasing out some of your space. So there's a niche there. Even though the area of a lease, you create a situation where someone else owns your building. Typically, you're going to be putting some kind of money into the project in the way of improvements. And I'm sure George is going to talk about that. That's one big area that is always a concern. Who covers those improvement costs? Is that a cost that you have to go get a loan for as a doctor? So you have a lease payment on top of a tenant improvement payment loan? Or do you have the landlord roll that into your lease payment? So they effectively become the bank. Remember the discussion we had back with Mike Montgomery from Live Oak and talking about, they like to work with doing SBA loans and owner-occupied projects. So obviously, this falls outside the realm of what Live Oak, for example, would be willing to do. So you're going to have to find a lending institution. Let's say that you the doctor, are going to be financing this tenant improvement. And tenant improvements can become expensive, can't they, Hon?
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of time when you hire a professional who are a strong advocate for your well-being. From time to time, I actually use this expression, and some some client may it might set them back a little bit, but because we're dealing with lots of money, and you want to hear people tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. What the title of our radio program is called Straight Talk. and we want just that. You want people to tell you straight. If you have an ID, you have, let's say you pick locations and you, based on your limited knowledge, you fall in love with it because maybe it's only, a walking distance from your house. But the location just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It's, it have all the things that that work against you, and you hire professional people that do this all the time, and they say, this is not a good thing, find something else. You can say to yourself, like, I know what I'm doing and move forward, or, take heed and ask them why. George is one of those kind of individuals that I've seen numerous of times and say, this is not a good location, walk. Okay, find something else. And those doctors that actually listen did a good thing and find something else that's more suitable, that has more pluses. One of the phrases that George I hear George use often is the home run location. And it's refreshing to work with people, to have people that take their profession, their expertise so seriously that they're not bashful or not afraid to tell you what you need to hear rather than what you like to hear. Okay, I enjoy that. I really value and respect that kind of service and that kind of mindset, because that they're so serious about what they do and what they believe in that they're willing to lose the account. Now, I actually, I had a tailor one time that I took a suit to, and I told him what I want, and he'd say, Han, you can have that, but it won't be done by this tailor. Okay, and he said, because what you want me to do will make a tall stature man like you shorter in appearance. And he was serious, and I took his advice and dropped that notion and let him do what he knows how to do best. Okay, so you got to trust those people because that's what they do for a living. That's what that's their expertise. And so I think it's that's one of the things. That's one of the many things I like about Georgia. Okay.
Excellent. Well, obviously, on top of that, when we get George on the line, if anyone out there has a question you'd like to ask specifically of us or George, feel free. Call us on our call-in line, the 657-383-1442. You can send us an email. You can contact us through the website, www.hjtdesign.com. But going back to our comments with, one of the key questions are going to be is negotiation of the tenant improvement costs. Who does those and who carries those and how do they get integrated into the funding of project payments? The other thing is going to be a term. Obviously, you're going to determine how long you want that to go for. If you're going to be putting in thousands and thousands of dollars, you would think that you would like to at least have the opportunity to be in there for a lengthy period of time. George will talk about that, I'm sure, but what we've seen before is something in the 5 to 10 year range that allows for you to be basically spread out that cost of that tenant improvement over the time. I think we got George on the line here. I'm going to pull him in. Han, hold on.
All right.
Hello, George. You've got Jim and Han. Welcome.
Hi, Jim and Han. Thanks very much.
Hey, good evening, George.
Hi, Han.
Well, thanks for taking the time out and joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So before I get into too far, let me introduce you to a listener. I did a little cheating, so I went onto your website, and so that way I kind of share your history and your ability and stuff like that, and you can correct me if I oversell or undersell. Okay.
It's all lies.
If you tell them with a straight face, George, and you tell them enough time, they'll believe you. Okay?
That's right. You say anything
anyway,
often enough, it becomes true.
That's right. Okay. That's my story, and that's how I operate too. George is an expert who negotiates the economic element of office leases for dental, doctors, and veterinarians throughout North America. George has personally negotiated more than 2,000 leases in over the last 41 years. So I think George started when he was about 8 years old. Okay. George negotiated lease on the landlord's side of the table for more than 15 years. So George has been on the side of the fence as well. He has specialized in dental, medical, veterinary lease as a negotiator for more than 24 years. He developed the acclaimed Learn and Earn series of commercial real estate seminars and had taught commercial real estate courses for landlord and broker at Boston University Metropolitan School of Real Estate Studies. George had authored dozens of articles, appeared in such publication as The Profitable Dentist, New Dentist, Strategies for Success, and Dentistry Today, including extensively on the topic of lease. He consulted to the federal government on commercial real estate. Let me see. My eyes is going out, George. And issues, and has served as an expert witness in commercial and real estate litigation matters. George is an honorable member of the Academy of Dental Management Consultation, National Association of Corporate Real Estate Executives, the International Council of Shopping Center, the Boston Society of Architects, and the American Society of Interior Designers. So George has been around a bit, and he has plenty of accolades. George, welcome to the show. The whole evening is dedicated to lease negotiation. It's an area that you are certainly an expert in, and I don't know if I can say enough about the value that you have brought to the discussion board and message board that we encounter on Dental Town. We have about roughly less than an hour, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to kind of share with the listener the things that you do, the things that they can expect, and numerous of things that associate with lease negotiator versus broker and realtors that they often encounter first. As a lease negotiator, I assume that you normally don't come to the table first, and it's probably not even a language or vocabulary that most people are familiar with or have heard. With further ado, George, could you share a little bit of your background and your specialties, other than what I have already read to the folks that you have on your webpage?
Sure, Han. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I have old-timer's disease, and frankly, I've forgotten a lot of those things already that you mentioned. I started negotiating commercial leases as a shopping center leasing agent in 1975, and for the most part, I represented mom-and-pop tenants, small, independent, single-unit owner tenants. So I really gained a pretty good insight as to startup businesses. During the first 15 or 17 years of my career, I actually worked both sides of the table, working for some small-time tenants as well as some small-time landlords. And I did my first dental office lease in 1992 just by happenstance. And after starting to cultivate a relationship with others who serve the dental industry, such as professional dental designers like yourself, I started getting an inkling that maybe there was a business here, simply because small-time business operators, whether they're dental or not, don't know any more about leases than anyone else, and they might need some help, and I could bring that to the table. So I started to develop an interest in understanding how dentists use their space and what kind of challenges they have that might be peculiar to their industry, and started applying that information to the process on behalf of dentists. And I think since 92, I've done about 1,600 dental offices all over the country. My business is national in scope. Actually, I've done business in Canada and in Hawaii, but mostly here in North America. Surprisingly enough, 1/3 of my business is California, Texas, and Florida, even though I'm based in Boston and Florida. An awful lot of my business is in the Sun Belt, and my theory is that the population follows the sun, and the startup dentists follow the population. So therefore, I get many of my calls come from the West Coast. I think that lease negotiation is a pretty important aspect of business development, simply because there are a lot of dollars at stake, but more importantly, there are legal obligations at stake when a dentist enters into a lease and commits to a long-term legal contract and commits to spending a lot of money to build out space in somebody else's piece of real estate. It's pretty important that that be done right. And although a major focus of what I do is on negotiating the economics themselves that are part of the letter of intent process, all of the elements in the letter of intent are important, and the letter of intent is what I focus on, to be followed by a second negotiation that is typically done and should be done by a lawyer with a very specific commercial real estate negotiation, lease negotiation skill set. So that's basically where I started.
Terrific. George,
among other, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Go ahead, George. Let you finish.
Well, I think among the things that you and I have talked about over the years is the various players who are in my realm might include real estate brokers, other professional negotiators, and attorneys. Just as an aside, many people confuse the terms. They call brokers and realtors and agents, they kind of use them interchangeably. Realtors, with a capital R, a realtor is a member of a professional organization, the American National Association of Realtors. Every realtor is a real estate broker or agent, but not every broker or agent is a realtor. So just a quick aside. But there are real estate brokers or agents who out there beating the bushes on behalf of dentists looking for space. In that role, they also offer to help the dentist negotiate the letter of intent terms. They are commonly compensated by the landlord or share in the compensation with the landlord's agent in order to, after they facilitate a deal, if they've been the procuring cause. In my world, I'm not involved at all in looking for space. I don't search. I don't evaluate space from a demographic or competitive standpoint. My focus is on the real property, on the physicality, on the building and the parking and the access and the visibility and the co-tenancy and the signage and things of that nature. And so I don't get involved in helping people look for space or evaluating the demography that they've come up with. Sometimes brokers in the transaction will help people with those various elements. But for the most part, dentists are left to their own devices to determine the viability of a location, and I do not stick my face into that. I've got too many other things to do to help them solidify their rental terms that will become the foundation of an operating contract for a very, very long time. And that's a pretty important contract because it has life-altering implications with the number of years that dentists commit to and the number of dollars that they commit to spending in the space. So those are the various other providers, and typically when a dentist is out looking for space, they might very well engage a real estate broker to help them locate space, and I think that that's a good thing for them to do. They should understand how that process works. They should have accountability on the part of the broker, and they should be in control of the process, control the agenda rather than let the broker push them around. They need to make sure that they give the broker marching orders and expect the broker to be accountable. But for the most part, brokers out in the marketplace can do a very good job of helping them locate an appropriate space. Whether or not a broker can help them negotiate impartially or actually paying allegiance to the dental tenant when that broker is being paid by the landlord is a subject of disagreement, and I don't think we necessarily have to talk about that so much today. I happen to be someone who believes it is very difficult for anyone to serve two masters, but that's just my personal take on it. So I think that, again, anybody looking for space could be well served by having a broker help them, and just make sure you understand where that person's allegiance lies.
George, I have a question in regards to one of you. You were introducing the length of term that you're going to be getting into when you sign a lease agreement. Can you talk a little bit about that length and what the advantages are over a long-term lease length, like a 10-year or longer, or a short-term lease, and what happens after the 10 years?
Sure. Well, the basics of most any contract, in most any contracts, there are assets and liabilities. Whatever rights and options there are, the optionee is gaining an asset through that right or that option, and the other party is burdened by the opposite liability. So everything in the lease is either an asset or a liability. If the landlord grants you exclusive use protection, as an example, to prevent a competitor from coming into the space, that's an asset for you, and it's a liability for the landlord, because the landlord can't let somebody else in to do what you do, and that reduces his ability to keep his spaces filled. So everything in a lease is either an asset or a liability. And the greatest asset that anyone acquires when they sign a lease is control of the landlord's real estate for their purposes, where they can set up their business and operate for a number of years unencumbered and make money as long as they play by the rules. The landlord can't change the deal or change the terms or take the deal away from them. So control of the landlord's real estate is the most important gain for the tenant. The most important gain for the landlord is the revenue that the tenant pays, the money the tenant pays, and that's the landlord's in the money business, the tenant is in the use business. So in terms of how long the lease should be, the landlord's goal is to get the longest, deepest hook into the tenant as he possibly can. That's the most common goal in most cases for the landlord, at the highest amount of rent and the least expense to himself. The goal for the tenant is to grab control of the real estate for as long as he possibly can without obligation at the least lowest amount of rent and the greatest advantage possible from the landlord. Most landlords' leases are typically in 5-year increments. Now, the lease can be any length of time the two parties agree to, but most are in 5-year increments. I have a kind of a silly theory about why we use 5-year increments, and I think it goes back to the original landlords, and the original lenders were the cavemen and who didn't have great language skills, and if they wanted to impress upon the other party how much, they held up 5 digits. They held up a hand with 5 digits. So I think that's where the 5 years comes from. The original lenders had 5 digits on each hand. So most landlords want a long-term commitment out of the tenant. Now, that's not always, because the landlord may have some other reason for wanting to keep it shorter. The landlord might want to maintain some flexibility for doing something else with the property or with the space. But for the most part, the landlords call the tune, and they say, look, if you want to be in my property, you've got to give me a 10-year lease or a 5-year lease or whatever the number is. And in most cases, landlords are using that lease contract guaranteed by a creditworthy prospect as collateral to borrow money. And when the bank wants to lend the money, the bank says, look, you've got to give me a contract of at least a certain minimum amount of time, or I'm not going to lend you money against that contract. So the landlord wants long-term. What the tenant wants is long-term control, but with some flexibility. And if the landlord says to the tenant, I insist upon having a 10-year commitment, and the tenant says, no, I only want a 5-year, I only want to give you a 5-year commitment, In most cases, when we're negotiating for dentists, we're looking for at least 20 years of control in some combination of primary term and renewal option period. And because an option to renew is absolutely a liability to the landlord, not an asset, it's never an asset to the landlord, because the landlord reserves the space, but the tenant's not obligated to show up for dinner. And so landlords don't like to give options to renew, and only do so as if they have to get the tenant to sign the lease. So if the tenant says to the landlord, well, I want a 20 years of occupancy control, the landlord might say, well, then you got to give me 10-year commitment up front, and I'll give you a corresponding number of years on the backside in renewal option periods. If you only give me a 5-year commitment up front, I'll only give you one 5-year option on the backside. So the landlord typically dictates that, provided the landlord has the ultimate leverage in that regard. When tenants ask me how long a lease should I sign, my answer is we want as much control as we can possibly get, with flexibility by way of renewal option periods. And the major consideration of whether or not to give the landlord a long-term commitment up front goes to security issues, whereas the landlord wants as much security as he can possibly get. And when you sign the lease, most landlords are going to want you to give them a personal guarantee. And in the world of dental startups, if the landlord insists upon a 10-year commitment up front, followed by renewal option periods, and at the same time insists that this dental startup, who's never run a business before, provide a personal guarantee that covers all 10 years, I would tell my client to walk away. Simply because even though the failure rate among dental startups is pretty low, that's a pretty big cut to take when you're starting out your business earlier in your life and you're walking in the door with a lot of debt to begin with. You don't want to be saddled with a 10-year commitment if your startup doesn't do well because you misjudged the demography. So if the landlord instead is willing to negotiate some limitation on the personal guarantee that might accompany a 10-year commitment, then I'm more inclined to say, okay, we can take a look at that. We could consider giving the landlord 10 years up front, provided that the personal guarantee is only limited to 2 years' worth of rent or 1 year's worth of rent or something of that nature. So the security angles are directly tied into the length of lease term that anyone might commit to. But I'll go back to the original statement as a final statement, and that is control of the landlord's real estate for as long as we can possibly get it, with predetermined terms and conditions that are spelled out in the lease up front that the landlord can't change or take away. That's our goal.
So the perfect lease would be 5 years with 5-year renewals for 15 years on top of, and only 1 year worth of personal guarantee.
Essentially, yeah. Essentially, a perfect lease would be a 1-year. Perfect lease would be a 1-year lease with 99 individual 1-year options with the rent spelled out in advance up front, and 1 year limit on the guarantee.
And you've never seen that, right?
Never seen that, but it's not uncommon to get a limit on the personal guarantee. I would say maybe 50 or 60% of the time we're successful in getting the landlord to put some limit on the personal guarantee, which takes pressure off of a startup in particular of giving the landlord a 10-year commitment right up front.
It's kind of like Han and I. We're looking for that client that doesn't have a budget, unlimited.
Yes, right, exactly.
We've not had that client in all these years, 30-plus years of doing this. I've never had a client that had an unlimited budget.
No.
Actually, in terms of HAT, we have not. Okay, but I only seen it once in my entire career, where a project went for the project was $3.5 million, and in at $15.7 million. Okay, I've only seen that once. Okay, but anyway, needless to say, that client was not a dentist. Okay, so we'll stick with dentists because it might cost them to have a heart attack, but for them to spend that kind of money on a practice.
Right.
Okay, so George, a lot of great information. George, when would you advise the dentist to seek out your services, or before do they go to a broker or a realtor first, or should they engage into a lease negotiator's service prior to speaking to or submitting anything to a broker for a site?
Well, I'm a firm believer that we all negotiate every day. We negotiate with our kids and our dog and our spouse and the guy who fixes our car. And in any negotiation, message management is a crucial part of the process. And so the answer is, if somebody asks me that directly, when should I bring you in? The answer is right now, simply because I want to help my clients control the message. The message is very important in the negotiation, and if my clients are set free to go and talk to the landlord or the landlord's agent, there's no telling what they're going to say. There's no telling what they're going to ask them. If they bring me in afterwards, I'm flying blindly. So that's a primary reason, not so much that they're going to say the wrong thing, but whatever they say, if I'm not privy to it and I say something different, then we have a credibility issue with the other side. So whether they hire me or anyone else, my advice, frankly, is that before they even step foot out the door to look for space, I ask them to call me, because I'll give them a lot of free advice about how to look at space, how to talk to the brokers and landlords, what kind of questions to ask, what not to say, what kind of a posture they should be presenting to the other side in order to set themselves up for the negotiation. Because, again, if they go into the process without that kind of guidance, they're likely to come out less advantaged on the other end.
Is that what you refer to in your on your website as a negotiation attitude and or posture?
You're right. Well, negotiation posture, I think it's a matter of establishing, how can I say this here? In any negotiation process, there is likely to be leverage on both sides of the equation. And exercising the leverage to the maximum benefit is a function of how we communicate our thoughts and our needs and our desires and our demands. And communication, I'm a word guy, so this is all about phraseology. It's all about establishing a certain expectation on the other part of the other side as to how we're going to operate and how we expect them to operate at the same time. If one is taking an extreme example of a negotiation posture, if one is taking a hardline position and we want the landlord to believe that that position is true and righteous and that we are emboldened to hold the line on something, we need to communicate that in a very, very specific way, and we don't want to reveal that we might not feel very strong about that. We might not want to reveal that we might change our position if we start out saying, well, here's what I demand, but I might change my mind. Well, that's a pretty weak position as compared to here's what I demand, and I'm not going to change my mind. And so the phrase that I use when I'm talking with clients, if they're ever in communication with somebody and they've taken a position and they feel righteous in the position and want to hold on to it, my suggestion is don't let them see any daylight. Don't let them see any daylight between the posture you're presenting and what your true feelings are. Because the minute you let them see daylight, that's a weakness that the other side will perceive and they'll exploit it.
George, in on our side table, providing the services to our client, we often advocate that, for our client to allow us to be the person at the front line between them and the contractor in particular. So that way, communication is also very crucial and important on our side of the table in the design and construction issues. Often that, if the client put themselves in a position to set the stage and set the posture and things like that, we have find that it makes our work more difficult because we're not privy to to things that may seem no harm to the client or by the client, but it jeopardizes the process or compromise the process. So in your negotiation efforts, do you advise the client to allow you to be the only voice that the landlord hears?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you explain
in fact, I insist upon it, and I tell my clients right up front, look, here's the deal. when you engage me, you're completely in charge in everything that I do. You make all the choices, all the decisions. I don't do anything without your authority. Every piece of paper that I get goes to you as well. Everything I'm going to send out goes to you first. I don't do anything without your authority. But during my part of the lease negotiation, which is letter of intent, I do all the talking to the other side. I don't want you talking to the other side. I don't want to be left out of the loop. That leads us to difficulty. And I also want to be able to control the posture, because you're not going to know how to control it the way I want it. I'm going to establish very clearly what I want to communicate to the other side using my words and my intonation and my phraseology, and I don't want you doing it your way, because that's going to interfere with me helping you, and also ultimately interferes with my paycheck. If you're communicating with the other side and that changes the terms of the deal, that might interfere with my compensation, where part of it is performance based. And I tell my clients, I don't want you talking to the other side. And if the other side, I want you to communicate right up front to the other side that I'm your guy. And if at any point in the process the broker for the landlord tries to go around me and back to you, there's only one reason they want to do that, and that is because they've decided that they can't manipulate me. They want to manipulate you. But I want them to know right up front that they can't blow any smoke up my skirt. I know what I'm doing, and you're not going to fool me, and you're going to deal with me, and we're going to do a nice job together, and everybody will be happy. But if you go around me, my client is instructed to push you right back onto me.
Yeah, and you have much success in maintaining that understanding?
Oh, yeah, that works pretty well. It's not very often that I run into a client who just goes, sometimes they go rogue. I have one right now is going rogue, and some people just don't like to relinquish the control at all. They get or they get frustrated with the process. Lease negotiation is not something that happens on a specific schedule. And most people are pretty patient. Every once in a while, somebody, even though I tell them why it may be taking so long, they may get frustrated and go around me to the broker and say, "Hey, why is this taking so long?" Well, the minute they reach out to the broker around me, that gives the broker the idea that it's okay to talk to them, and then that still starts to really complicate the process. So, it's not very often that they try and go around me that way.
Yeah, in our work, that happened a couple of times, and unfortunately, the tenant, or should I say, our client, took on upon himself, to deal with it directly with the contractor, without our knowledge, and it ended up with them losing a lot of money. By the time that we discovered, we couldn't save him from himself. Okay?
Right.
So, George, let's see. I got a couple of questions here I'm trying to put together. Because the question often asked, and it asked publicly, you already say how the broker and or realtor get compensated. As a negotiator, how do you get compensated?
Well, my compensation is a combination of a guaranteed fee and a performance fee. And the guaranteed fee that is paid to me up front ultimately is deducted from the total performance fee at the other end of the transaction if I'm successful in improving upon the economics, comparing the landlord's written starting point to the economics that appear in the lease that my clients sign. I would prefer not to talk about specific numbers now because things change.
I understand.
The last time I did one of these was a few years ago, and people still call me and say, "Hey, wait a minute! I thought your fee was that. I saw that podcast." So, but basically, my fee arrangement is a guaranteed fee, which is paid up front, and we do the negotiation. And if we're successful and we sign a lease, if I've been successful in saving my clients money according to the formula, a very transparent arrangement, I've earned a performance fee, and before that fee is paid, the guaranteed fee that had been paid up front is deducted, and whatever balance remains is paid. If there is no lease signed for that property, then my guaranteed fee is just rolled over to the next property and the next property and the next property until we sign a lease somewhere and we do the math.
Terrific. George, of course, other than finding a new space and negotiate the lease, is there any other scenario when your expertise can be a benefit or beneficial to the clients?
Yeah, I about half of my business is what I call a renegotiation, and that may involve a dentist with an existing office lease that has to be renegotiated. It may involve a practice acquisition where there is a lease to be secured or transferred in the process, and in both of those, I basically help my client take a look at the existing lease, try and get a sense of what the current ground rules are in that contractual arrangement. I interview the client as to what their goals may be. We talk about their long-term plan and how the current property or the intended property will apply to their long-term plan, and what things they may want to do in terms of their occupancy arrangement to guarantee the kind of controls and or flexibility that they may require in order to satisfy their long-term plan. And then I help them negotiate new terms by interacting with the landlord's agent or with the landlord directly on those. I also occasionally have tenants who come to me who are looking for a buyout arrangement. Either they want to get out of their lease and they need to come up with some kind of a negotiation to get the landlord to let them out of the lease, or conversely, I have clients who come to me and say, look, my landlord wants me out of the building. I've got 12 years left on my lease, and frankly, it'd be nice if I could find another place because I wouldn't mind going, but I want to get the best deal I can from the landlord. And in that case, we might very well be able to get them a lot of money just to get out of the building. And then finally, I've got, for a long time now, I've had about 16 landlord clients for whom I do lease work, and they're spread out all over the country. About half of those are dentists who own their own building, and they've got a couple of spaces that they lease out to other people, and I help them. So I stay involved on the landlord side of the table at the same time to stay sharp.
Fantastic, George. George, you went through an awful lot of information and stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure I haven't capitalized on getting areas that may slip my mind. But can you share any advice to doctors that are looking to establish their practice for the first time, that associate with site or looking for locations and or looking to leasing, things that they could keep them out of trouble?
Sure. I come out of the retail real estate industry again. I started as a shopping center leasing agent 43 years ago. And I grew up in the world of retail real estate where large lighted signage is critical stuff. You'll never see Starbucks without a great big green sign. You'll never see TJ Maxx without that big red and white Target. You'll never see Target without that big red and white Target. Right. You'll never see Dick's Sporting Goods without a big, large lighted sign. You'll also never see any of those companies do anything without spending massive amount of money on demography. And it's absolutely critical. There's so many people who try and start businesses without an appreciation for trying to accommodate demand for their service or product. We've all heard of someone who say, gee, everybody tells me I make great lasagna, I think I'm going to open a restaurant. Well, just because you make great lasagna doesn't mean you have any idea what to do to run a restaurant. Well, demography is the key here. Demand is the key. It actually all starts with demand. So what I ask my clients is, what is it you have to offer? And who is your target audience? Define your target audience demographically. And where do you think you're going to find them in large areas of concentration? And who is currently serving them? And what is it that you're going to do that's different than the party that is already serving them? And what are you going to do in order to make sure that they know that you're in the marketplace? So there's so many basic elements in business startup that apply to every type of business, not just to dental, but it absolutely applies to dental equally so. And in my world, signage and parking are a really, really critical element. signage clearly for dental specialists is not critical because there'll be just address driven by referral. But anybody who's not strictly referral or predominantly referral driven can only benefit by having a large lighted sign. And I know that there are plenty of dentists who have survived very well inside a building somewhere. They're hidden and they don't have a sign, but the opposite is mostly true. Most people who are in an environment like that don't thrive. They may survive, but they don't necessarily thrive. The converse is that if you get yourself with a large lighted sign and the busiest block of the busiest street on the right side of town in the middle of the demography with a big sign that faces the street so that and you're located between where mom lives and where mom shops at the supermarket, to me, that's the kind of place I would encourage my dentist to be looking.
Very good, George. We often, we look at, we always advise them that where the women of the house take the kid to school, do their shopping, where the post office and things where you get, I think you use the expression where the most eyeballs can see the location.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, George, we have just a few more minutes. Thank you for coming on, George. So, if our listener is, before I go next, Jim, do you have any other questions for George?
Well, I guess the one component that will always, I'm sure, is on everybody's mind, and George, if you take a few seconds to talk about, is that aspect called improvement costs. So let's say you've negotiated a lease with your landlord, but at the same time, I as a dentist are going to throw a bunch of money in improving this space. How does that work? What's the best for me as a dentist, and how do you deal with that?
Well, the best for you as a dentist, there are a couple of different components. One is depends on what your borrowing power is. If you have the ability to borrow money to put into the landlord's real estate, that's very different than if you're coming into the equation without very much money at all. The degree to which the landlord might make a contribution is a function of a number of things. Every landlord has cash capabilities or no cash capabilities. Every landlord has obligations to lenders and stockholders and spouses and partners. And every landlord has a property operating philosophy that informs his choices about how he structures his rental terms and whether or not he's prepared to give away tenant improvement dollars or lower the rent instead. And he has a unique economic model to satisfy at that moment in time, and every landlord does it differently. So people ask me at the beginning of the process, well, am I likely to get a big allowance from this landlord, or which is better? Cash flow is a critical element of survival in any business, and so clearly we want the lease to be structured to provide you with maximum cash flow, but at some point you got to take money out of your pocket and put it into the landlord's building. In most cases, we're not necessarily going to see the landlord contribute more than about 20%, maybe 25% of the total tenant improvement cost. It's pretty unusual to see much more than that. And again, some landlords will say, you're a startup. I'm not going to put $150,000 on the table for a startup, but I'll give you a lower rent instead, and you come up with the cash, and you risk your money. I'm not going to risk mine. And other landlords will say, well, my lender requires that I have to show $25 a square foot in the leases that I present as collateral instruments, and therefore I can't lower the rent, but I can give you some cash. And somewhere in between is where the deals fall out, and we don't know where the dollars are going to come from until we get into the conversation with the landlord in the letter of intent process. We don't get dollars from every landlord. We don't get lower rent from every landlord. But in most cases, there is some give on the other side, and the degree to which we get give is a function of supply and demand, and how badly the landlord wants that tenant as a client.
Excellent. On.
George, there was a discussion recently among the counties about the IT money, whether the landlord will give that up front or after the project completed. I know your response, and I have the same. Could you share a little bit on your perspective on that?
Yeah, I don't think if I'm a landlord, I'm not going to give a stranger a bunch of money without proof of that they've spent it. If I may promise to give you some money, but I'm only giving you money because those dollars are going to be earmarked to improve my piece of real estate. You're not going to be able to use those dollars for dental fixtures and equipment. You're going to use those for physical improvements to my real estate, the value of which will be enhanced by that money that I'm putting into the building. And so I'm not just going to give you a check and then hope that you don't run away with it and send me a postcard from Tahiti. I want you to spend your money first, and then I'll compensate you for what you put into my building. But I'm not going to give you cash up front. In my experience, Han, I could count on one hand the number of times I've ever seen a lease where the landlord has fronted the money. It's very unusual.
I would be surprised, if they do. I wouldn't either. Okay, because I would hate to receive a postcard from Tahiti.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Hey George, how does the listener? How can the listener find you? Call you or anything like that. So here's your few a minute of plugging yourself.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for allowing me to come on and make a contribution here. I've enjoyed this a lot. And basically, I have first of all, I have a toll-free number. I've had a toll-free number now since about 1983. I had my toll-free number is 800-340-2701. 800-340-2701. I have a website, GeorgeVaill.com. Vaill is V-A-I-L-L, GeorgeVaill.com. I can be reached by email at george@georgevaill.com. I can be reached by email at gvaill, G-V-A-I-L-L, at comcast.net. Even though I'm based on the East Coast, because so many of my clients are on the West Coast, I take advantage of the opportunity to sleep late. I don't answer the phone before 11 in the morning, but if you call me at 9 or 10 p.m. in the East, I'm happy to take your call. And that's 7 days a week. I do that. I do that 7 days a week, because I spread my work week out over 7 days. I sleep late. I play golf in the afternoon, but I work really hard all the rest of the time.
Fantastic, George. And you can find George on various golf courses in Florida around this time of the year. Right, George?
Absolutely.
Again, George, appreciate your time and glad that you make time for us.
Thank you very much,
I don't
gentlemen.
chat with you. Yeah, I don't chat with you between now and Christmas. Have a Merry Christmas, George.
Merry Christmas to you folks as well. Thank you, Han. Thanks, gentlemen, and we'll talk another time. Have a great night.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, Jim. We got a couple minutes.
Yeah, we do. Let's. That was very informative, and actually, I learned 4 things that I didn't know about myself. And we've been doing this for years. Amazing. You're never too old to learn something. What has happened on Dental Town last week? I know it's been crazy with the holidays and everybody's getting back into the scheme of things at the same time they're turning around and thinking about Christmas. It's even affected us. We're pulling together our shows. Obviously, we're going to have a show next week. We've got a potential very exciting guest, another expert in the field, and hopefully we can get that solidified and have her join us next week. But right now we can't say that for sure. So what's happening with Dental Town?
On Dental Town, there's recently a discussion. It pertained to, the ADA. In this case, it's had to do with the height of countertops. Often, let me see, when we practice architecture or in design, you have people or practitioners that are rather conservative, and they only stick to whatever they're comfortable with. If the codes say, ADA countertop height is 34 inches, it's 34 inches, and they move on. They don't look at any exceptions and things like that. And we, and we find ourselves in that situation from time to time. In this case, it was an ADA countertop discussions where the client say, or the doctors say, my architect say that my countertop has to be at 34 inches per ADA requirement, and the doctor said, but I want mine to be at 37 inches, which is typically unusual. I've seen countertop for bathroom and stuff like that have gotten a little higher than your kitchen counter, which is usually at 36. But a work surface, in ADA application are usually 34 inches high. Jim, what have you run into in that realm where there's exceptions to the rules? Do you know? Have you encountered anything where?
Yeah, the ADA, which you're referring to as the American with Disabilities Act, is very specific. If there is a range available, they will put that range available. But if they say 36 or 34, it's going to be one or the other unless they say 34 to 36. So, and you really don't have a leeway. If it says countertops are to be 34 inches, that's it. You get 34 inches. If it's 33, you're out of compliance. If it's 36, you're out of compliance. I could understand the doctor wanting to have a countertop at 37. I'm 6'4", and I feel more comfortable at higher countertops. Now, obviously, for an individual that's not my height, a lower countertop is going to feel better because if I'm standing at a countertop, I spend too much time stooping down because they're too low. But at the same time, the norm has been established at a countertop of 34 inches. So I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, when it comes to the American with Disability Act, the ADA rules and regulations, they're specific. And if the code says 34, it's 34. Now, sometimes like restroom fixtures, specifically locations of toilet paper holders, those kind of things, they give you a range. It can be within this much or this much. Then you have a little bit of flexibility. But no, when it says a single number, that's it. You don't get a chance to go in and say, I'd like to have it at a different number. Doesn't happen.
Yeah, actually, there's I think there's a couple of things that may give you, give the listener something to chase. Okay, it was brought into the discussion by one of the contributors, and I think it, of course, the final call is based on the interpretation of the local code official. 34 is what you can expect. If that's what they want to adhere to, it is. The other a little bit of wiggle room is that you can make the argument that the work area, for instance, pertaining to the laboratory, the lab, and or the sterilization area are specifically for work, staff work area, and the public doesn't go into, don't wander into that area at all. So that may be an argument to present and allow you to have the 36-inch countertop. Okay, but again, that argument or that presentation, if the building official will buy into it, then you may have a little bit of wiggle room. And totally understandable is that when you have a 36-inch countertop and you want to put a piece of appliance underneath that piece of appliance would be a normal, a normal standard size. But if you have a 34-inch countertop and you want to put the same piece of equipment underneath it, you will have to buy one that's specifically designed to be an ADA compliant appliance, and it will cost you more. So it was an area that of interest for a few, the participant on Dental Town, But it was interesting is that a lot of times that the client may want something, but the ADA or the code mandates something else, and often 99% of the time the code wins. Okay, so it was a good discussion, but a little bit of research. Reach out to the code official, and you might be able to persuade and convince the building official that what you're trying to do is in compliance with the with the existing code. Okay, that's all for now,
Excellent. Jim. Excellent. Well, I like to also announce, just as of last week, we have now included Germany is one of the countries that we have listeners tuning in to us. So we're all over the place, hon. Amazing. Totally amazing.
I'm wondering how they translate us into a foreign language. That's cool.
They probably speak English and they understand us just fine. We will have a show on the 18th. That's next Tuesday. As I stated, we just have not been able to confirm the guest that we'll be interviewing, but we will have a show no matter what. And we look forward to seeing you there and listening to what we may have to say, and at least being together and providing some information that hopefully is useful. I know that George is a wealth of information. I'm very glad that he was able to be part of our show. And obviously, if you'd like to hear more of what we have talked about over the past 15, or actually now it'll be 13 shows, including this one, you can always go back to our website at www.hjtdesign.com and catch any one of the podcasts from the last previous shows. And we look forward to being part of your evening next Tuesday. Han, thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to our show, and I hope that you've learned some valuable morsels of information from George. Again, till next time, have a good evening.
You've been listening to HJT Design Radio Straight Talk with Jim and Han. To contact us and find out more info about upcoming shows, please log on to our website at www.hjtdesign.com. Until next time.